Well, they say it's been a honeymoon period for the Rudd Labor government. But what do the union leaders think about IR? Let's talk to some of them right now.
Shrinking the reach of labour law is very important. Up until the late 19th century, if you're a unionist, you were guilty of a criminal conspiracy if you sat down with 3 or more of your friends and talked about raising wages. In the 1870s, a whole series of acts were put in place called the Trade Union Acts, which provided the first legal recognition for unions. From there, labour law evolved. We got our system of conciliation and arbitration, and for basically the 100 years after that, labour law has expanded as a domain which has kept the savagery of the commercial law and the criminal law at bay. Work choices is quite deliberately directed at reining in labour law and letting relations at work be governed more by criminal principles and commercial law principles.
The delegates have started to disappear out of a lot of workplaces, and then the organiser's got to basically take it on that he's going to get prosecuted. So he's facing fines, he's facing jail time. The cohesion that was achieved last year in the fight against work choices has to be maintained, and it's going to be hard.
The key issue is fair income, genuine collective bargaining rights returned, because they were killed by work choices and other legislation, based on ILO conventions. In other words, you've got the right to strike, you've got the right of entry of union organisers in the workplace, you've got protection of shop stewards, job delegates, OH&S reps, all of those things. Genuine collective bargaining rights must be returned. That's number one.
You're aiming at international labour standards to be completely adopted, including collective bargaining and the right to strike?
Well, the core labour standards go to a number of things. They go to Convention 87, which is freedom of association. When that's married with Convention 98, then that gives you the right to organise and bargain collectively. Inherent in that, in those conventions is an implied right to strike, and the jurisprudence around that is cautious, but it's there. And of course, if something's so serious that it's necessary for people to stop work, or if indeed it's a political protest, then you can see during the Rights at Work campaign that Australia actually took a political protest decision nationally on 4 separate occasions, and indeed on other occasions on a union by union base, or indeed in a community context when they were defending the rights of workers who were victims of work choices. So we will certainly be working to see that those fundamentals that Australians voted for, the right to be a member of a union and to be duly represented by the union, the right to organise and bargain collectively, so majority collective bargaining rights, the right to unfair dismissal protections, and indeed some other of the key elements of our workplace relations system will be protected and indeed reinstated into the forthcoming legislation. But there will be a capacity for people to take strike action. I've got no doubt that we will find a fair system for Australia, given that most countries in the world don't have the kind of protective action environment around bargaining that we have.
The Trades Hall Council has recently had a planning forum, and our executive last week has said the Your Rights at Work campaign must stay at the same level, if not a higher level, to make sure we get a good result in terms of the new proposed IR legislation.
Well, we made it clear prior to the election that the Your Rights at Work campaign would not be complete until the legislation was in place. We already saw a couple of backflips from the Liberal and National Party. You had Brendan Nelson saying work choices is dead, then Julie Bishop saying that in fact they wanted to continue AWAs under a different name. Then you saw a partial back down last week on Tuesday, and then a complete back down the next day from Julie Bishop, where they said the transition bill would be passed through the Senate. The transition legislation does 2 things. One, it draws a line in the sand. There will be no more individual contracts or AWAs in the Australian Industrial Relations framework. What it does is therefore secure the rights for people who are, from now until the new modern award system, who are employed, to have either the guarantee of the current award system or indeed to be protected by way of a collective agreement. Individual contracts, AWAs, gone forever. For those workplaces who have used individual contracts, who don't have an underlying award or collective agreement as the industrial instrument, then there is a capacity to have ongoing individual arrangements until the end of 2009, and they will be, though, very different beasts. They will have the award system as the no disadvantage test, but they will be for a very, very small number of people. Where there's an award or indeed a collective agreement that can be relied on by employers, then that's the basis we would expect employers to use. And you can already see that even where the mining industry, for example, has had individual contracts, they're now talking about collective arrangements because they know that the use of ITEAs, transitional arrangements, on an individual basis is a short-sighted approach to actually managing your workforce when they won't be part of the industrial system into the future.
We need to take this up with the Labor government that the interim bill services such a small section that it's almost next to useless, the paper that it's written on.
Do you think that the transition bill has anything in it to recommend it to the CFMEU?
In terms of the CFMEU, the rest of the trade union movement obviously have varying situations, but for the CFMEU, it's not simply the transition bill that we're concerned about, it's also the role of the Building Industry Improvement Act, which produced the ABCC, who basically is harassing our members and our officials in terms of what they do every day as far as work is concerned, in terms of health and safety, union organisation, and it's going to be a big year.
Our executive here at Trades Hall talked about the 2020 Vision Summit coming up in April. Wanted to know where it was going, what use it could be in terms of our campaign to get decent IR legislation. And then we raised it with the ACTU. Please push Rudd and Gillard for some representation.
With the Labor government, of course, we have ambitions to work much more closely on policies that are about a shared set of values that make life easier, more secure for working families, and of course contribute to improving an Australia that we can be proud of. We'll always have an independent voice for workers, certainly a cooperative endeavour on our part, but we will always reserve the right to speak out on behalf of working Australians and their families. We can't have any degree of confidence that when you get to the main bill, which of course has key issues for working people, rights like unfair dismissal protections, like the right to bargain collectively, for unions to represent their members in the workplace and through the bargaining process. These things, I think, will be contested. We'll have two independent senators who, need to hear the voice of working people and what it was that they voted for on November 24th. So a long way to go yet. And just this week we've sent out material to unions, to members of community groups, asking them to visit their politicians, to ask them about those key features of the legislation, what their views are, what the timetable is, will they support those issues in the Parliament. So the democratic process, the campaign for your rights at work, continues from the ground up.
So I think there's a much more direct transaction has to take place between the Rudd government and the trade union movement.
The 1983 summit had all of the ACTU executive on it when Hawke called that, when Bob Hawke called that. We now have Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard. No sign at all that the organised trade union movement is going to have representation at this point in time.
We have to find a way to continue to mobilise people that believe in these things and that became so active and passionate over the last few years. We have to find the language that makes sense, but also find the ways that are not about just sitting quietly behind a closed door, talking to a Labor government and hoping they're going to listen. It has to be about a combination of campaign tactics that are broad and creative in their type and in their execution. And that is building alliances and campaigns that go beyond individual unions and the union movement to those people that have been active in changing a government, but that have a legitimate set of expectations that go far beyond what's currently on the agenda for the government that we've